Almost there. Chapter 32, Tiana. Tiana dodged thatches of thick vegetation that protruded from the earth as she led the way opposite where Naveen and Louie had traveled. "You doing okay, Lottie?" she called over her shoulder. "What do you think?" came Charlotte's retort. Despite the direness of their situation, Tiana had to laugh. "If it makes you feel any better, I'm proud of the way you're holding up. You haven't complained nearly as much as I thought you would." "Just give me time," Charlotte replied. The deeper they journeyed into the copse of the algae-covered trees and tall reeds, the more pungent the briny, stagnant air became. The humidity wrapped itself around them like a damp, dank cloak, its saturating presence bordering on it unbearable, despite the fact that it's not quite spring. It signaled a scorching summer ahead of them. Something swooped down just over their heads, emitting a loud caw. Charlotte yelped. "What was that?" she cried. "Oh, goodness, Tia, I just know we're going to get eaten by some horrible swamp creature." "The animals here are more afraid of you than you are of them," Tiana said. "Except for the gators, but she wouldn't mention those." "That's hogwash," Charlotte said. She slipped and reached out for a nearby tree to steady herself. "Ew, ew, ew!" "What now?" Tiana asked. Charlotte pointed to the horde of bugs crawling along the tree bark where she had just had her hands. Tiana held up both of hers. "I can't help you. You know how I feel about bugs." She took a step back and caught her foot on a broken stump protruding from the ground. Tiana flailed, her arms windmilling in the air. She overcorrected herself and pitched forward, barreling into Charlotte. They both landed against the bug-covered tree. "Ew!" Tiana and Charlotte screeched simultaneously. "Move, move, move," Charlotte said, pushing at Tiana. Tiana scrambled into a standing position. She slapped at her arms, even though she hadn't been against the tree long enough for any of the bugs to get to her. Charlotte, on the other hand... "I am officially complaining," Charlotte said, as she peeled a slimy bug off her sleeve and flung it to the ground. She pointed in the area where she'd thrown the creature. "What's that?" Tiana looked down. The brooch Miss Rose had given her lay among the foliage. "Oh, it must have slipped out of my pocket when I fell," she said. Tiana retrieved the brooch and, this time, pinned it inside her coveralls. "Come on," she said, reaching for Charlotte's arms. "We can't let Naveen and Louie win." "So it is a competition," Charlotte drawled. "A friendly one," Tiana quipped. You know, Tia, I've been wondering, how friendly do you feel towards Naveen?" "Don't start, Lottie." "I just think if you gave him half a chance..." "Don't," Tiana reiterated. Charlotte threw her hands up. "Fine. I won't say how perfect I think you are for each other. You're driven, and he's so carefree. You balance each other out." Tiana marched ahead, ignoring Lottie. "But you two are perfect for each other," her friend called. Tiana ignored that too. They happened upon an area of fallen tree limbs ripe for the picking. Both she and Charlotte searched the timber pile. "Okay, how about this one?" Charlotte asked, holding up a scrawny pole that didn't look as if it could hold the weight of a 1-pound catfish. "I don't think that one will be strong enough." "You've been poking through these sticks for 20 minutes already," Charlotte said. "Just be patient," Tiana said. We'll eventually find the perfect branch." "In case you haven't noticed, patience isn't one of my virtues." "You don't say," Tiana laughed. "You, on the other hand, have the patience of a saint, Tia. Always have." Charlotte tossed a stubby branch over her shoulder. "Take the other day at Maison Blanche, for instance. I don't know how you keep your cool when that saleswoman stopped you from trying on that hat." Tiana paused in the middle of lifting a rotted-out tree limb from the pile. "Lottie, you do realize such things happen to me all the time, don't you?" "What?" Charlotte recoiled, her face a mask of confusion. "Tia, what are you talking about? That lady was absolutely horrible to you. You're saying she's been that way to you before? Why didn't you tell me? I would have suggested to go to another store." "It wouldn't have mattered," Tiana said as gently as possible. "It would have been the same way at any of those other department stores." This was neither the time nor the place to have this conversation. Though, in all honesty, Tiana wasn't sure when would be the good time to have this conversation. There were some things that were just better left unsaid, especially when dealing with her well-meaning but often oblivious friend. "Don't worry about it," Tiana said. She turned her focus to a pile of reeds, twigs, and tree limbs that had collected at the base of a nearby cypress tree. Despite the damp earth muffling the sound of Charlotte's footsteps, Tiana could hear the sucking sound of her feet sinking in with each step she took through the mud. "Tia?" Charlotte's voice was quiet. "Tia, please talk to me. How can I know how to fix this if you won't even talk to me?" "There's nothing for you to fix." "It sounds as if there is." "This is much bigger than you, Lottie. It's complicated." Tiana blew out a weary breath. "Besides, we have other things to worry about right now." "But what makes it so complicated?" "Because we're different. Don't you see it, Lottie? We're different. How can you not see that?" Tiana covered her face with her hands, one part of her wanting to shield her friend from this truth. It was just easier to let Lottie live in her perfect little world where everything was black and white and those murky shades of gray didn't exist. Yet, Tiana had been forced to face these facts ever since she was a little girl. She had known how different their worlds were from the moment she stepped into the LaBeouf mansion and realized the entirety of this little house her family lived could fit in their grand entryway. She'd known as she watched her mother sew dress after dress for Charlotte, using the kind of soft, silky fabrics Tiana could only dream of wearing. Fabrics so much more luxurious than the rough cotton her own dresses were made of. Those differences, the stark reality of the existence she lived compared to Charlotte's, had been part of Tiana's life for as long as she could remember. Her mama had told her a long time ago that it wasn't proper to mention the LaBeouf's money. But just because she couldn't talk about it didn't mean Tiana hadn't noticed. It hadn't occurred to her until years later, when they were both in their teens, that Charlotte had never fully grasped that Tiana didn't have all the privileges she had. And here they were, both on the cusp of turning 20 years old, and Charlotte still didn't seem to understand. "Even though we live in the same city, it's as if we came from two different worlds," Tiana told her now. "I don't know if you understand just how different our worlds are." "I'm not as naive as you assume, Tia. I know Big Daddy's money allows me to live a charmed life. It's not just about the money, it's about everything, about our lives in general," Tiana said. "What happened at the department store is a perfect example. What happened at Maison Blanche was not right, and they will never get another red cent from me. I know it wasn't right, but I also know it's the way things are. It's the world that I have to live in, Lottie." Several uncomfortable seconds ticked by before Tiana asked in a quiet voice, "Do you want to know how I got roped in with the Shadow Man?" "I have no idea why you'd ever get caught up with the likes of him," she answered. "It's because at first he offered to give me my restaurant," Tiana said. "I turned him down, but I was tempted, Lottie. I was tempted because I spent years working at Duke's Cafe and Cal's restaurant. I socked away every penny I earned, and it was barely enough for the down payment on that old run-down sugar mill." "But you did buy your own restaurant." "But look at how long it took, and as grateful as I am that Daddy and I are able to afford that building on Trem, it still isn't the place I had my heart set on. Of course, it's not as if the Fenner brothers would have sold it to me anyway," she continued with a sarcastic snort. "They already decided I wasn't fit to run a restaurant like that." "What gives them the right to decide what you can and can't do?" "It's done all the time," Tiana answered. "People assume I'm a maid because that's usually the only type of work a colored woman could get in this town. It's the only type of work we've been allowed to do save for those who have skills that can't be denied, like Mama. People are often surprised to hear that I'm a chef who owns her own restaurant." Well, at least you've shown those Fenner brothers that you can run a restaurant, and I'm sure you'll eventually earn enough to buy that building you really want. Tiana leveled her gaze at Charlotte. How long have we known each other, Lottie? Well, Tia, you know we've been knowing each other since we were both in knee-highs. And how long have I talked about opening a restaurant? For as long as I've known you, Charlotte said with a laugh. All you've ever talked about was making your daddy's gumbo and selling it in your restaurant one day. She put her hand on Tiana's shoulder and squeezed it encouragingly. That's why I'm so happy to see you finally getting that chance now. You made it happen. Tell me something, Charlotte. In all the time, did you ever think to ask Mr. LaBeouf to help me? Charlotte froze. Well, no. You're so proud, Tiana. You would never have taken charity from Big Daddy. You're right. I wouldn't have accepted charity from him, but do you ever wonder why it never crossed your mind to offer to help me, Lottie? Tiana swallowed past the knot of disappointment clogging her throat. Your daddy is the richest man in the city and one of the most influential. There are more ways he could have had an impact than just with his money, like vouching for me with the Fenner brothers, or talking with the councilman about my venture, or even hiring me to cater his company's parties. Are you saying all of this is my fault? Charlotte asked. Of course not, Tiana said. She hated feeling this way. She hated the sadness in Charlotte's eyes. In a way, she understood why it never occurred to Charlotte to offer help. She'd had everything handed to her, sometimes on an actual silver platter. She was the product of her daddy's over-exuberant affection. If you lived your entire life never wanting for anything, why would you ever look at someone else's lot in life and compare yours to it? It wasn't in her friend's nature. I'm not blaming you for anything, Lottie, Tiana said. But I need you to understand that the world sees us differently. Tiana shrugged her shoulders. It's not fair. It's the way things are. Charlotte glanced at her, nodding slowly. Well, I say we start to change the way things are. I say we raise a ruckus until things change. She held her hand out to Tiana. Tiana paused, then took the hand and shook it. It wasn't as easy as that, but it was a start. I say you've got yourself a deal, she sighed. But before we can change the world, we have to figure out how to get the boat out of those brambles. And look here, Tiana said, picking up a slim but sturdy-looking branch. I think we found a winner. She started back toward the boat, but before she could take one more than a couple of steps, Charlotte grabbed her hand again, halting her progress. Tiana looked at their clasped hands, then up at her friend's face. The look in her eyes was so humble and full of understanding. Tiana wasn't sure if she'd ever seen such a look from Charlotte in all the years she'd known her. I meant what I said. Her tone was earnest, heartfelt. I know that I can be selfish and stubborn, but I want to be a good friend to you. The best kind of friend, because that's the kind of friend you have always been to me. Oh, Lottie. Charlotte dropped the branch and wrapped her arms around you. I'm glad you're here.